In cinemas from next week is a new film from director Kelly Reichardt, whom you might know from Old Joy, Night Moves, and 2016's Certain Women. As good as those films are, they are unfortunately all Toby Jones. That's all changed now because First Cow is a new movie set in the Pacific Northwest of the 1820s. It features Toby as British landowner chief factor. We'll hear from him after this clip.
I've heard about your cakes. I'd like to try one if I may. How much?
For you, only 10 silver pieces.
Well, cinnamon. It's nice. I taste London in this cake. Bakery I once knew in South Kensington. Astonishing.
I love that clip because when I was watching the film, Toby, I was thinking, Toby Jones joins us, by the way. I should say Toby is in his special radio studio drama cubicle somewhere in his house. Hello, Toby.
Hello. Good
Hi.
afternoon.
So when it came to that bit of the film, I wrote it down. I wrote down that exchange because you've bought this astonishing creation from John Maguro and Orion Lee, who are Cookie Figurettes and King Lou, and we follow them as they start out on their kind of business adventure, baking these obviously extraordinary cakes. What is it that you were eating there that tastes of London?
Well, I mean, I think there's something about the quality of the cake. I mean, John, as part of his cake boot camp, was cooking the actual cakes, I mean, and they were really good, and that's him grinding real cinnamon onto those real cakes, and they tasted really good. I mean, I don't know what the provenance of the milk was, but I mean, they tasted good to me, and it wasn't much, as usual, not much acting required.
So take us into the world of First Cow, which is an intriguing title. It's an intriguing movie. Tell us about Chief Factor and where you fit into this story.
Yes, chief factor, not chief actor.
Obviously,
it's the most beautiful script. When I read it, I knew Kelly's films a bit. It's a very it's a deceptively simple story about two fugitive guys in a friendship, and the film begins with a quote about friendship, that friendship is the home is a kind of home for men, a William Blake quote. And it's a very delicate human film about the sort of birth of the northwestern part of America, which Kelly's films are often about, in Oregon. And it's about two guys who are in flight, we don't really know why, and they meet each other and they come across a cow, a single cow, the first cow in that part of America, and they steal from the cow in order to make the cakes you've talked about, and they begin to dream about a business. And we realise that, without it being an allegory or anything, something more poetic than an allegory, we realise that we're talking about the American dream on some level, and certainly about capitalism. And if that makes it sound dry, it isn't at all. It's a love story between two men, but it's also a love story between Kelly and the landscape, which is sort of an ongoing love story, I would say. And indeed by the cinematographer Christopher Blauvelt, who does an amazing job at seeming to to find a way of shooting the American landscape that seems to be, authentically shot at that moment in the 1820s.
And into this world that you've just described comes your character, not the chief actor, but Chief Factor.
Yeah,
which is an interesting title. So, and even though when we meet you and you're loving their cakes, we do realise that you're Well, I don't think this is a spoiler. So you're not necessarily the most pleasant person going. Tell us how Chief Factor fits into this story.
Well, a factor at that time was someone involved in trade, and the chief industry at that time is the trading of pelts, beaver pelts specifically. So there's money to be made, and he's an English guy who's exporting these pelts and making a lot of money. And it's his cow that has been imported from Jersey to provide milk for the tea that he serves rather pretentiously to not just a local captain who he's trying to show off how sophisticated he is, but also to Native American chiefs, because there's a sort of fragile coalition going on at that time between the Native American. The Native Americans in that part of Oregon. And so you see my character, in a way, he's their ticket out of there, because he's going to pay them to make these delicious cakes, because he doesn't yet realise that he's actually being robbed in order for that to happen. So there's an element of foolishness. I'm not sure how evil he is. I think he's very much a product of his time. It certainly wouldn't help me to play him to realise that he was in any way a baddie,
There's a lovely moment in which he asks them to make a very particular dish, which I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce, Toby.
Clafouti.
Clafouti. And there is such relish in this word. Can you make a clafouti? And he says brilliantly that the reason he wants to make it, apart from the fact that you're obviously enjoying the word as much as you're enjoying the cake, is that he says, I want to serve it because I want to shame him. And there is this marvellous kind of conceit. It's big drama on the tiniest scale.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think the film starts, doesn't it, with that amazing contemporary, like from now, a tanker going across the screen, and it's a mysterious image, because you thought you were going to be in the 1820s, but you realise that the cow that we see later is almost the tanker's the end product of the cow in a way. And the whole film is based on these exchanges, which will eventually, I suppose, develop into the America we know now,
And Toby, I just want to ask you one other thing. I mean, I really love the film. I'm a fan of Kelly Reichardt's anyway. But I've said before in the past that you have, a scene-stealing ability that is matched by almost nobody. The introduction to you in this film is so brilliant, because everybody in the film is kind of, shades of grey, and there's a lot of mud. You can feel the earth, and it's all kind of, there's a lot of trudging through dark environments. And literally the first shot of you, top hat, dressed.
Pristine you are.
Of course I am. Kelly, I'm not wearing that. Get me a top hat.
I read that John and Orion, the two main guys, were sent off on survival boot camp and learned how to make fires and all that kind of stuff. And then anyone who looks at you in this movie thinking, yeah, and you didn't go on that boot camp, did you?
I was hanging out in Portland, mate. I wasn't there. No, I think, the thing that touches me most, and there are many things about this film that touch me hugely, but the delicate, the fragile, beautiful relationship between those two actors that they conjure, this beautiful sort of Edenic, innocent, naive, sort of unusual relationship that they have, and the way that the film doesn't question it or problematize it in any way is such a gift that, if you can call it that, that Kelly Reichardt gives in this story. It's so beautifully understated, and yet it means so much,
Bong Joon-ho, who was on the programme a while back talking about Parasite, is a huge fan of this film. In fact, he said he's jealous of the movie. But I thought the most interesting quote from Kelly Reichardt, she was talking about all that stuff. She said, "My films are glimpses of people passing through." And that's certainly true of this film, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I think it's just a very it's fascinating, isn't it, to think that this is going to result in modern industrial, post-industrial America, in high-tech America. It's just fascinating because, in a way, all the negotiations that are taking place, you can't help thinking about that. You can't help thinking about multinational companies, even in the way that, in a small way, that these people are being screwed over.
There's a little
Go on, Mark.
there's a character detail that is said about your character, which is he's somebody who cannot imagine that he is being stolen from. And I
Yeah.
thought that was a really lovely thumbnail detail that tells you so much about what kind of character he is.
Yeah, complacent, entitled, limited. In a way, America's too big for him. There's there's a beautiful image at the end where there's an enclosure around the cow.
Yeah.
And I think that image of the cow, which we've seen beautifully, the milk being beautifully coaxed from him by John, as Cookie sort of milks the cow and talks delicately to the cow, and then at the end we see the cow fenced off. And in a way, I think that the chief factor, who isn't even granted a name, is that fencing process, the smallness, the restriction of this. This extraordinarily beautiful country it hasn't yet been exploited.
I was interested that you used a phrase a couple of minutes ago, Toby. You were talking about there's an element of foolishness in the story. And when my wife said to me, who's on the show this week? I said, Toby Jones. And then obviously she was delighted.
He's a complete fool.
No, and she said, what's the film? And I said, it's about these two guys. And they're sort of setting up a business, and they make these extraordinary cakes, but they're stealing milk from Toby Jones's cow. And she said, is it a comedy? And I realized that the way I described it, which is clearly true, but maybe that was, clearly my setup was rather poor, but there is that kind of element of foolishness, almost farcical at times in the story.
Well, yeah, I thought originally, oh, this is a fable of some kind, that there's a lesson to learn here, but it's not as restricted as that. But it has the simplicity, or if you want to call it like a bit like a joke. A guy brings a cow into a country and doesn't realise he's being stolen, and enjoys the things that are being stolen from him. But I think it's more poetic than a fable, in a way, or a parable, which isn't to suggest it's being pompous in any way. It's so rooted in the earth. It's not trying to teach any lessons. It's just she's literally just suggesting things, alluding to things, and that's why her cinema is so extraordinary, I think.
Yeah, and also, most importantly, go and see this in a cinema. I didn't have the opportunity I watched it on my laptop in the middle of the day, and a lot of the film is very,
dark.
in the dark.
Dark.
It's
Very dark.
very dark. You need this to be projected on a big screen, don't you think?
Yeah, it's dark, but when it's light, it's just this amazing colours that I remember filming in. That Christopher, his cinematography is so extraordinary. I don't know if you agree, guys, but I just think it's so. You can sort of smell that era in the smoke and the leaves and then these sort of like almost joke like trappers being enraptured by these cakes. These guys haven't tasted anything for months as they've been out in the wilderness, and they come in and suddenly they've got a cookie. It's kind of incredible.
I think that one of the things that's remarkable about her films is her use of Kelly Reichardt's use of frame of not widescreen frames of 4:3 in Academy. She understands that ratios don't have to be wide to be expansive. That actually there is something about an older cinema ratio that can feel completely immersive, and particularly in those shots in which you see characters with the faces behind ferns, and it's hard to make out what's the foliage and what's the person. And I think that cinematography.
But that's saying something as well, isn't it? I think that's saying something as well about the state of that nation at that time, about people were still in and of the land. And Also, just a very deliberate way that she holds on a scene that appears to be over, and just has a little bit of Native American dialogue that's that between two people, and it's just like going, this is also going on. This is also happening. It's not just about the people in charge,
And always remember, if you're trapping beavers, eat the tail.
Eat the tail. Eat the tail. No wonder you need the cake. You're not eating enough beaver tail.
First Cow is in cinemas from next week. Toby, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. What else are you? I know you always have like half a dozen things all on the go at the same time. What are you working on at the moment, or what do we see you in next?
I'm just about to start one of those projects I'm not allowed to talk about, so I'm not talking about that.
Is it Star Wars? Is it Bond?
Well, it's that sort of project. But I've during lockdown we filmed a film about Tetris, the game Tetris, which is a great film that John Baird has directed, which is a lot of fun. And then coming up, there's all these delayed films that I worked on before. That are coming out. Gil Keenan's latest film, which I've really enjoyed making, A Boy Called Christmas, and indeed the film with Benedict Cumberbatch about an artist whose name eludes me in the hurry of this.
There's so much going on in your life.
At the moment. This film you can't talk about, is it a Marvel film?
That's exactly the sort of thing I can't talk about.
Okay. And are you a superhero? Do you fly? Have you got X-ray vision?
It's
Do you
exactly
die?
that sort of question that will give away the thing that I'm not allowed to talk about.
Have you signed a non-disclosure agreement with Disney?
I seem to have signed a non-disclosure agreement with just about everyone I work with.
Right, okay.
Even this conversation is compromising me.
Absolutely. We won't ask you to do anything else. Toby, thanks very much for talking to us.
Good pleasure. Thanks. See you guys.